The stable was silent, until the screaming started. A massive wild boar burst through the wooden fence like a monster from the dark, its tusks covered in mud, its eyes filled with rage. Horses panicked. Chains rattled. One young foal slipped in the corner, trapped with nowhere to run. Then, the giant horse moved. No one had ever seen him this angry before. The 2,000-pound stallion slammed his hooves into the ground so hard the entire stable shook. Workers froze in terror as the wild boar charged straight toward the foal. But the giant horse exploded forward like a living tank. Crash! Wood shattered. Dust filled the air. The boar flew across the stable after a single brutal kick. But it wasn't over. The wounded beast stood up again, even more furious. And what happened next left everyone screaming in disbelief. If this moment already gave you chills, don't scroll away just yet. This is just the beginning of a battle no one was ready for. If you felt the tension in this scene, hit like right now. It really helps more people discover this story. Subscribe and press the bell icon so you never miss powerful, emotional horse stories like this. Now tell me in the comments, when the giant horse stepped forward, did you feel fear, or did you already know the boar had made a huge mistake? And don't forget to share this with someone who loves intense, emotional animal survival stories. Rain hammered the roof of the old stable like bullets falling from the sky. Thunder growled across the dark countryside, shaking the ground beneath the horses' hooves. Inside the stable, the animals were restless. They stomped nervously, pulling against their ropes while their frightened cries echoed through the wooden building. Something felt wrong tonight. Even the air carried a strange tension that made every worker uneasy. Jacob, the oldest stable hand, lifted his lantern and slowly walked between the stalls. "Easy now," he whispered, trying to calm the terrified horses. But the animals only grew worse. One horse kicked the wooden gate so hard it cracked down the middle. Another refused to stop screaming toward the darkness outside. Then came the sound. A deep, savage growl echoed beyond the stable walls. Every horse froze instantly. The workers looked at each other in silence. Another growl followed, louder this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crushing mud outside. Jacob slowly moved toward the entrance while rain blasted through the open cracks of the building. The wind suddenly became violent, rattling the walls as if something massive circled the stable. Then, crash! The wooden fence exploded inward. Workers screamed as broken wood flew across the stable like weapons. Out of the darkness emerged a gigantic wild boar, bigger than anything they had ever seen before. Mud covered its thick body, and fresh blood dripped from its massive tusks. Its red eyes burned with rage as steam blasted from its nostrils. The horses lost control instantly. Some tried to break free. Others slammed into their stalls in panic. One terrified foal slipped near the back corner of the stable, too small and weak to escape the chaos around it. The little horse cried helplessly while the giant boar slowly turned its head toward the trapped animal. Jacob grabbed a shovel and shouted, trying to scare the beast away, but the boar charged forward with terrifying speed. It slammed into one of the horses, sending the animal crashing violently against the wall. Wood shattered everywhere. The injured horse screamed in pain as blood stained the straw-covered floor. Panic consumed the stable. Workers ran for their lives while the boar stomped through the stalls like a monster unleashed from hell. And in the farthest corner of the stable, hidden within the shadows, stood the giant horse. Silent. Watching. His massive body barely moved as his dark eyes locked onto the raging boar. The frightened foal cried again, trapped only feet away from death itself. The wild boar lowered its bloody tusks and charged directly toward the helpless foal. But before it could reach him, the giant horse stepped forward from the darkness. For a moment, the entire stable fell silent. Rain continued pounding the roof while the giant horse slowly stepped out from the shadows. Lightning flashed across the dark stable, revealing his enormous body. He was unlike any horse the workers had ever seen before. Taller than the others. Wider. Stronger. Old scars covered his muscular frame, reminders of violent battles from a past nobody fully understood. The workers feared him from the day he arrived. Months earlier, several men had struggled just to pull him from the trailer that brought him to the ranch. One stable hand had called him a monster after seeing him kick through a thick wooden gate with terrifying ease. Another refused to go near him after the giant stallion nearly crushed a metal feeding barrel beneath his hooves during a fit of rage. People whispered stories about him constantly. Some believed he had once belonged to illegal fighting rings. Others claimed he had killed wild predators before arriving at the ranch. No one knew the truth. But everyone agreed on one thing: when the giant horse became angry, nothing around him remained safe. Only the ranch owner, Samuel, never feared him. "He's not evil," Samuel once told the workers while staring at the massive stallion standing alone in his stall. "He only fights when something innocent is threatened." At the time, nobody believed him. But now, as the giant horse stood between the foal and the wild boar, Samuel's words suddenly felt real. The boar let out a savage scream and charged again, its bloody tusks aimed directly at the terrified foal. Workers shouted in panic as the beast stormed across the stable floor like an unstoppable tank. Then the giant horse moved. With a violent roar, he lunged forward so hard that the thick metal chains around him snapped apart instantly. The sound echoed like gunfire through the stable. Pieces of broken chain flew across the room while horses screamed in terror. Boom! The collision shook the entire building. The giant horse slammed into the wild boar with horrifying force, sending the massive creature crashing sideways through a wooden stall wall. Wood exploded into splinters as the boar rolled violently across the ground. The stable erupted into chaos. Terrified horses kicked wildly against their gates. Lanterns swung from the ceiling. Workers stumbled backward as dust filled the air. The foal cried helplessly while trying to crawl away from the destruction. The giant horse quickly stepped in front of the smaller animal, shielding it completely with his enormous body. His ears flattened. His nostrils flared with fury. Every muscle in his body tightened as he prepared for another attack. For a few seconds, the boar didn't move. Then suddenly, the beast rose again. Blood dripped from its tusks as it growled louder than before. Rage burned in its eyes now. The violent impact had only made it more dangerous. The giant horse pawed the ground aggressively. The wild boar lowered its head. And beneath the crashing thunder outside, both beasts stared at each other like monsters preparing for war. The wild boar attacked first. With a deafening scream, the beast charged across the stable floor like pure destruction unleashed. Mud and broken wood flew beneath its massive body as its razor-sharp tusks aimed directly at the giant horse's chest. At the very last second, the stallion twisted sideways. The tusks sliced through the air barely inches from his body before smashing deep into a wooden post behind him. The entire support beam cracked from the impact. Horses screamed in terror while workers rushed toward the exits, slipping through mud and scattered debris. "Get out! Everybody get out now!" Samuel shouted as another section of the stable ceiling shook violently overhead. The giant horse wasted no time. Before the boar could free itself from the broken beam, the stallion spun around and delivered a devastating kick with both back legs. Crack! The sound echoed like an explosion. The wild boar flew across the feeding area, smashing through barrels, buckets, and wooden troughs. Grain burst into the air like smoke while shattered wood scattered across the floor. But the monster wasn't finished. Growling violently, the boar climbed back onto its feet almost instantly. Blood dripped from its mouth now, mixing with rainwater and mud covering its thick fur. Its eyes locked onto the giant horse with murderous rage. Then it charged again. The horses panicked harder than ever. Some broke free from their stalls completely, crashing into walls while trying to escape the nightmare around them. Workers pushed each other toward the doors as the stable groaned like it was about to collapse. Suddenly, a lantern hanging from the ceiling snapped loose. It crashed onto the straw-covered ground. Flames exploded instantly. Fire spread quickly along the dry hay while thick smoke began filling the stable. Horses screamed even louder as heat mixed with fear and chaos. In the middle of the destruction, the boar lunged low and finally struck the giant horse. Its tusks slashed deep into the stallion's front leg. The giant horse roared in pain as blood splattered across the wooden floor. One worker froze in horror after seeing the wound pouring blood down the horse's leg. But then something changed. Behind the giant horse, the trapped foal cried again, weak, terrified, and injured by falling debris nearby. The stallion turned his head slightly toward the foal. And rage exploded inside him. His eyes darkened with pure fury. Every muscle across his gigantic body tightened as he stomped the ground hard enough to shake the stable. The fight became savage. The giant horse charged forward violently, smashing through wooden stalls while attacking the boar with terrifying force. The boar countered with brutal bites and violent swings of its tusks. Walls shattered around them. Fire spread across the floor. Smoke twisted through the air as thunder roared outside. Then came the moment nobody would ever forget. The giant horse reared upward in slow motion, towering above the flames like a creature from legend. His powerful front legs rose high into the smoke-filled air before crashing downward toward the boar. Boom! The impact sent the wild boar flying straight through the stable doors. Wood exploded outward into the storm outside. For 1 second, everyone thought the fight was over. Then the boar stood up again in the rain. Samuel's face turned pale. "Run!" he screamed at the workers. The wild beast growled from the darkness outside while the giant horse charged after it without hesitation, disappearing into the stormy night. Rain poured from the sky like a flood unleashed from heaven. Thunder exploded across the countryside while violent wind bent the trees surrounding the ranch. Outside the burning stable, the wild boar raced through the muddy fields at terrifying speed, its massive body crashing through puddles and broken fencing. Behind it came the giant horse. The stallion charged through the storm like an unstoppable beast driven by pure rage. Blood still poured from the deep wound in his front leg, but he never slowed down. Every thunderstrike revealed his enormous shadow tearing across the dark fields behind the fleeing monster. From the stable entrance, Samuel and the workers watched in horror. None of them dared follow too closely. The fight no longer looked like an animal attack. It looked like two monsters hunting each other in the middle of a nightmare. The wild boar suddenly disappeared behind an abandoned barn near the edge of the ranch. The building had been broken and empty for years, its roof half collapsed from storms long ago. Rainwater poured through the shattered wood while darkness swallowed everything around it. The giant horse slowed near the barn. Steam rose from his body as he searched through the shadows aggressively. His ears twitched at every sound. Mud dripped from his powerful legs while lightning flashed overhead. For a moment, everything became still. Too still. The workers watched nervously from the distance, struggling to see through the heavy rain. Samuel felt something was wrong. Then suddenly, the wild boar exploded from beneath an overturned wagon beside the barn. The beast slammed directly into the giant horse's injured leg with horrifying force. The stallion let out a violent roar as the brutal impact nearly knocked him completely off balance. His massive body crashed sideways into the mud, shaking the ground beneath him. The workers screamed. The boar attacked again instantly, slashing its tusks toward the horse's throat. Mud and water sprayed everywhere as the giant stallion barely twisted away in time. For a brief second, the horse's eyes locked onto the distant stable glowing behind the storm. And he remembered the terrified foal crying helplessly inside the fire and chaos. That memory changed everything. The giant horse rose slowly from the mud, breathing harder now. But something darker burned inside his eyes. The pain no longer mattered. Fear no longer existed. Only fury remained. With a savage roar, the stallion charged forward like an avalanche unleashed. The wild boar tried to dodge, but the giant horse smashed directly into the broken wagon beside them. Crash! The entire wagon exploded into splinters. Wooden wheels flew through the air while shattered debris rained across the muddy field. The boar screamed after being crushed beneath part of the wreckage, but it still fought wildly, clawing and biting through the destruction. The giant horse attacked again mercilessly, forcing the beast backward across the soaked ground. Step by step. Closer and closer. Until finally the wild boar reached the edge of a steep riverbank hidden behind the barn. The monster stopped suddenly. Behind it, raging floodwater crashed violently below. And standing before it in the rain, the giant horse prepared for the final battle. The storm raged harder than ever as the giant horse stood near the edge of the riverbank, breathing heavily through the cold night air. Blood ran down his wounded leg, mixing with thick mud across his enormous body. Every breath looked painful now. Steam rose from his skin while rain hammered against his scarred frame. Across from him, the wild boar growled viciously. The beast looked just as destroyed. Blood covered its tusks. One side of its body dragged slightly after the brutal attacks near the barn, but hatred still burned in its glowing eyes. Behind the boar, the flooded river crashed violently against sharp rocks below the cliff edge. Neither beast moved. Thunder exploded overhead. Then suddenly, the wild boar screamed and launched forward for one final desperate attack. The workers watching from far away froze in terror. The boar charged faster than ever before, ripping through the mud with murder in its eyes. Its giant tusks aimed directly toward the horse's injured chest. But this time, the giant horse was ready. At the last possible second, the stallion twisted sideways with shocking speed. The boar missed by inches. Then came the kick. Boom! The giant horse smashed both back legs into the side of the boar's skull with devastating force. The impact sounded like bones exploding apart. The wild beast flew sideways through the storm before crashing violently into a pile of jagged rocks beside the riverbank. Stone cracked beneath the impact while muddy water splashed high into the air. For a moment, the boar didn't move. Samuel lowered his lantern slowly, believing the nightmare was finally over. But then the beast twitched. Slowly, painfully, the wild boar pushed itself back onto its feet again. The workers stared in disbelief. Even after everything, the monster refused to die. Blood poured from the side of its head while its legs shook violently beneath its weight. But somehow, it still growled at the giant horse standing across from it. The giant stallion lowered his head. Rain dripped from his face while thunder rolled behind him. Every muscle across his massive body tightened one last time. Then he charged. The ground shook beneath his hooves as he exploded across the muddy riverbank at full speed. The boar screamed and charged forward too. And then, crash. The collision sounded like two trucks smashing together. The force of the impact shook the earth around them. Mud and water exploded into the air while the workers covered their faces from the blast of debris. Then suddenly, silence. The storm still raged overhead, but near the riverbank, everything became still. Samuel slowly stepped closer with the others, following carefully behind him. None of them spoke. Fear filled every step as they approached the battlefield hidden within the rain and darkness. Then lightning flashed overhead. And they saw him. The giant horse stood alone in the mud, breathing weakly while towering over the defeated wild boar lying motionless beneath him. The monster was finally finished. From behind the workers, the frightened foal suddenly broke free and ran toward the giant horse. The small animal cried softly while pressing against the stallion's blood-covered body. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. The giant horse had saved them all. The stable, the workers, the foal, everything. But as the storm continued roaring across the countryside, the giant stallion's legs finally gave out beneath him. And the exhausted hero collapsed into the mud. Morning finally arrived over the ranch, but the destruction left behind looked more like the aftermath of a war than an animal attack. Sunlight slowly pushed through the dark clouds, revealing the ruined stable covered in broken wood, blood, and mud. Burned sections of the walls still smoked from the fire, while shattered fences stretched across the fields like crushed bones. Everywhere people looked, signs of the night's battle remained. Deep hoof marks destroyed the muddy ground outside the stable. Broken wagon pieces lay scattered near the old barn. Even the riverbank looked torn apart after the final collision between the giant horse and the monstrous wild boar. Word about the attack spread quickly through the nearby town. By sunrise, groups of people had already gathered around the ranch entrance. Farmers, workers, and curious families whispered nervously while staring at the destruction in disbelief. Some had heard there was a wild animal attack. Others claimed two monsters had fought during the storm. Nobody truly believed the stories until they saw the damage with their own eyes. Inside the stableyard, workers described the terrifying fight over and over again. Jacob pointed toward the shattered stalls while explaining how the giant horse had protected the foal from the very beginning. "I've worked around animals my entire life," he told the crowd quietly. "But I've never seen anything like that beast last night." Another worker showed the massive broken chains still hanging from the stall where the giant horse had been held before the attack. The thick metal links looked twisted apart like cheap wire. People stared silently. Near the stable entrance, the ranch veterinarian carefully treated the giant horse's injuries. Deep cuts covered the stallion's body, especially the wound along his front leg where the boar had struck him during the battle. Despite the pain, the horse remained calm now, breathing slowly while the vet wrapped clean bandages around his scars. Beside him stood the little foal. The small horse refused to leave the giant stallion's side for even a second. Whenever workers tried leading the foal away, it immediately returned, pressing close against the giant horse protectively. Samuel watched the scene with emotion burning in his eyes. Slowly, he stepped closer to the injured stallion and placed a hand gently against the horse's neck. "You saved every one of us," he whispered. The giant horse lowered his head slightly, almost as if he understood. By afternoon, the entire town spoke about nothing except the battle during the storm. Children called the stallion the guardian of the ranch. Workers repeated stories about the final fight near the riverbank. Even hunters admitted they had never seen a wild boar large or violent enough to cause such destruction. From that day forward, nobody ever looked at the giant horse with fear again. They looked at him with respect. Because beneath the scars, the rage, and the terrifying strength, the giant stallion had revealed something far greater than violence. He had revealed loyalty. And as night slowly returned to the countryside once again, the wind carried a distant sound from deep within the dark forest beyond the ranch. A low growl. Something else was out there.